All right, 11:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Being the last session, or the last session before lunch on the last day, don't want to keep you guys longer than I have to. So, all right, my name is Daniel Pfeiffer, and I am the lead developer at Float. Now, Float specializes in custom development of performance support applications for industry-leading companies. We're a fairly small team. There's just 25, 30 employees overall, and even fewer of us are actually developers. We're a small team looking to make a big impact, and we want to work on big projects to do that. So I really like working on medium to large size projects. Some of our earlier projects were a lot smaller in scale with a lot smaller budget. We actually used PhoneGap to build some of our early applications. And don't get me wrong, we actually built some pretty cool stuff, and I was pretty happy with how some of them turned out, and some of them are still out there and are receiving a lot of good feedback. But with project budgets that were only dipping into the 5-figure range, it's really hard to innovate. It's really hard to do much more than what we'd already done, just make small improvements along the way, because the budget just didn't allow for it. And so working with a large client offered us something new. Typically, large clients have larger projects, and these larger projects typically come with larger price tags tied to them. And so that's a big win. Another big win for us is that large clients typically offer further reach in terms of the audience that they are able to impact. They just have more people that they interact with on a daily basis. And that's great, because that means that the work that I do, the code that I write, has a greater impact of reaching a wider variety of people. And hopefully I'm impacting their lives for the better. That's exactly what I want to be true of the code that I write. And I think it's a win from the other side too. See, as a large company hiring a small outside firm, it allows them to sidestep some of that red tape that they typically encounter at every turn inside the walls of their business. More than that, being a small company, we're able to take better advantage of that larger budget. We have less overhead. We're able to offer more creativity, more agility, more new ideas. All of these unhampered by their corporate atmosphere. Even if they have a really positive corporate atmosphere. We're a specialized company, so we have a series of past experiences that we're able to bring forward and just have a higher chance of being successful in whatever it is they're asking us to do. And actually government agencies, who we also do some work for, they actually encourage they are encouraged to work with small businesses because it helps with job creation. So this is kind of a win-win. So what's the catch? Well, there's probably a lot of catches in working with large companies, and the one that I'm focusing on is just perhaps the obvious, that large projects are hard for a number of reasons. Unpacking that a little bit, large projects, there's just more unknowns, more challenges, more just working with people that you've never had to work with before. And all these add up to more risk. And this risk, I believe, is so much to the point that even the most talented of developer or the talented team of developers, without the right process, without the right workflow, without the right expectations, success is going to be unattainable. They need all of these things. And so I don't know what it is you're working on. I don't even know if you're a developer or if you're leading a company. But I do know this. I know that if you're here at this conference, that you are interested and in some way invested in the software development process. And so what I hope to do today is to share with you some of our experiences working with large clients at the hope to be able to inspire and encourage you to think about the workflow that you're using. Perhaps there's small changes you can be making to improve that process, and also really challenge you in what it is that you're investing in. This doesn't really talk about money so much as it is a talk about people and about software. We'll talk about money because it would be kind of foolish not to. But the question that has been sitting at the back of my mind ever since I started thinking about this is this. How do we support people to build great software, which in turn provides opportunities to build up great people? I really believe that thinking about this question, focusing it, trying to find answers to it, is a really great first step towards success. So here's what we're going to do. I have just a series of lessons learned over the last couple of years. We're going to go through this roadmap here. The first step is going to be before you get the work. Then we're going to talk about working the work, delivering the work, and finally, finishing it all up and delivering the final product to your client. So, first thing I want to talk about is that initial idea, that initial proposal. And what we've learned is that Quadcharts are a really great way of conveying that initial idea, far more so than like a 15-page white paper technical proposal. I was talking with another speaker earlier this week, and they shared what I found to be kind of a really sad story, which is that they've seen time and time again smaller companies just investing time and energy and ultimately money to try and get these really large projects. And the problem is that these proposals that they spend weeks making, they don't really get paid for them. These are just at a chance in order to be able to get just a slice of that pie that these large enterprises offer. And it's kind of a waste, especially when things don't work out and they've risked the whole company on just getting this chance. And so let's talk about quad charts a little bit. Now, if you're not familiar with a quad chart, it is, as the name suggests, a chart that has 4 quadrants. In the top quadrant, you might put your concept. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? What does it look like? And this is very brief. Like, this is one sheet of paper that you are producing. There's not much room in this upper left box. But in the essence, what is this idea that you are conveying? Below that, you're going to talk about the technical approach. How are you going to go about solving that problem? On the other side, you're going to talk about what are the capabilities? What are the notable or new features that you're thinking about developing? What makes these better than the existing features, and who wants these new features? What is your solution capable of doing? In the bottom box there, it's kind of the nitty-gritty. The cost, the schedule, like what is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? What are the deliverables? Is the end product going to be a research paper, a prototype, or is it going to be an application that's ready for production? And finally, contact information. How do they get in touch with you? Now note about what I have here after cost, and the letters ROM. What I mean by that is rough order of magnitude. So the hope is that something like this should only take half a day, maybe, hopefully no more than a full day to produce. But like a detailed cost estimate, that can take a couple days to go through all of your planned functionality and thinking through what is it that we need to build here? How much time is this going to take? That's not really appropriate at this stage because you don't want to be investing that much in just this idea that you want to pitch to a client. So this rough order of magnitude is really just a range, a ballpark, something to give your client to say, this is kind of what we're thinking about here. Is this even feasible for us to keep going down this route? Now, we didn't really invent this. We certainly did not invent this. Actually, this came out of some of the government work that we've done. Interestingly enough, government is actually not interested in wasting your time when you're doing work for them. And so the first step is they require you to submit a quad chart. And so if they're not even interested in your idea, they're not going to take it any step further. And so we've taken that and started applying it to our enterprise jobs as well. And for the most part, it's been met with a lot of success. Because what we found is that the quad chart is, in many ways, the minimum viable product of the proposal. It is a very quick way to get an idea out and get people talking about our idea. It also is the too long didn't read of white papers. I've produced a 15-page white paper, and I'm very sure that it was never actually read by the person I delivered it to. Because the quad chart is often more efficient at communicating an idea. It forces me to cut out all this cruft, maybe the technical information that the person that is ultimately making the decision doesn't really understand, doesn't even care about. This serves as a good conversation starter. Because it is so brief, the people that are getting it, it helps them spark ideas. It also forces them to come back and ask you, like, well, have you thought about this? Like, what else is there to do about this? And in the same vein, it's also very easily shareable. Because it's not 15 pages of paper or a PDF that they're having to pass around, it's just one sheet. It's something they can very easily load up on an iPad and walk over to someone else's desk and share it with them, which is great for you because, remember, your contact information is on there. And so while they're talking about this idea that you've presented, all along, it's all within the context of you or your company that they're talking about it in. Now, this does not really does not in any way replace what would ultimately be a longer technical proposal. Because at some point, you are going to have to produce that. It's just simply what they require because they want to make sure that you actually know what it is you're talking about. What this does is it allows you to test the waters. See, is there any interest in your idea? Did they actually want to move forward with this? And you can figure that out without investing a lot of upfront time in being able to do so. It's a best case scenario. They love your idea, you're in, time for the next step. To which I say, expect some red tape. They might get to sidestep some red tape, but you just get to inherit the blessing of being able to go through that. And specifically what I'm talking about is vendor and supplier onboarding. Now, if you're not familiar with this, ultimately, this is just to vet your reliability as a supplier. They want to make sure that you actually can do what it is that you say you're going to do. And this can feel intrusive because they're going to do background checks. They might do credit checks. They're going to ask you for all sorts of information about your business. It might be your DUNS number. It might be your tax identification number. If you're doing government work, there's even more codes that they're going to want to know from you. This is all information you're going to have ahead of time, but it just feels very intrusive. But it's important because ultimately, this is what is going to grant you access to submit invoices for payment. You want to get paid. That's very much important. This also gives you an opportunity to be introduced to their software standards or requirements. Some of these large companies, they actually do have coding guidelines. Some people might not stick to them, but they have documented expectations as to what the work you produce is going to look like. It may also introduce you to their company code of ethics, if they have it. Some don't. That might be obvious. But another important thing is that this establishes your master services agreement, or the MSA, with the client. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment, but there's a lot of other things that takes place during the supplier and vendor onboarding process. But this is what we found to be a pretty common list, or this is a good expectation to at least start moving forward into that. So let's talk about that master services agreement. If you're a small business, this is likely just going to be handed to you by the large corporation, and they're just going to say, here, sign this. But you want to make sure that you actually understand what it is that you are signing. This is going to govern your relationship with this client really for the foreseeable future, not just for one project. It sets the expectations and the responsibilities for both parties. It says this is what you're responsible for, this is what they're responsible for, in terms of payment, in terms of the work produced. This is what sets all of that. And so all your future work, your future statements of work, your POs, whatever they may be, they're all going to fall under the umbrella of this MSA. And it's really important that you read this, because there's some specific things in there that we're going to go over in just a moment that may impact how you want to be able to do business. So it's important to bring a lawyer in to explain this agreement. What is it exactly that you're agreeing to? Now, stepping aside for this for a moment, I also want to talk about the security assessment. If you have the pleasure of being able to go through one of these assessments, you'll be going through an extensive questionnaire about your company's computing practices. And I say extensive, I literally mean 40 pages of questions that just ask you, are you doing things securely? This is a good opportunity for you to evaluate your company's computing practices or your security practices, because there's good questions in there. There are things like, are you encrypting personal and identifiable information? Are you not keeping passwords in plain text? What are your backup practices? We are going to find that there are some potentially very odd or just not applicable questions. And I kid you not, an example of this is, what are your contingency plans in case of a global pandemic? I had never thought about that when I got that question. I was like, well, I guess the data's just going to go away. I don't even really know why you care about this data in this event. I've got bigger problems that I'm worrying about. But they want to know. They want to know that you're thinking through some of these things. So it's really important that you find someone, hopefully on the inside, that can work you through some of these questions. Because these questions are so watered down and just vague that it's really hard to understand. What is it they're actually asking here? Having someone on the inside to help explain their expectations will go a long way. And in the same end, you just have to expect there to be multiple revisions of this. This can take a long time of going back and forth. So here's the principle that I want you to pull out of this. Don't disqualify yourself at this point in the game by being difficult to work with. At this point, this is a 5K. This is not a sprint. You want to pace yourself as you're going through this. You want to be responsive to their questions. You want to be very cordial when they ask you to do seemingly ridiculous things. This is not time for a sprint yet. Take your time. So back to the MSA for a moment. Make sure you're protecting your intellectual property. I need to preface this with, I am not a lawyer, not even remotely. So this I cannot classify as legal advice. But I can share you with a little bit of what we've learned in this, which is that make sure you understand who owns the code at the end of the project. And separately, make sure you understand who has the rights to use this code in the future. I would encourage you, really recommend to you that you really want to be able to reuse the work that you're producing, continue to build on it for future clients, maybe for this client. We have at least one application that has seen more than one life at more than one client, which is great for us. First of all, we get to continue to build on something we've already done. We're not going back to back to square one every single time, but it lets us learn from our mistakes and ultimately makes us better so we can release better products for our clients. Now, again, this might be decided in the MSA. This really depends on whoever it is you're working with. Some of them decided at this parent level contract and some of them decided individually. So it's, again, important that you brought hopefully a lawyer. Maybe you understand legal jargon. I don't really, but this might be decided in that MSA, so make sure you read it. So at this point in the process, hopefully you're creating the contract for this point of work. You're thinking about what is it you're going to quote. And at this time, it's really important that you understand how much work there actually is. Create an hours estimate. And this is true even if you don't necessarily plan to use the hours estimate to price the work, because what's really key here is that you need to understand how much time is this work going to take you to produce. And I mean that from a few different ways. First of all, it's really important that you make sure that you actually are planning enough time to produce the work. Do you have people that are able to do this in the amount of time that you're telling your client, yeah, we're going to have the alpha to you by such and such date? That's really important. It's also really important that you are, it's very important that you understand how much time this is going to take from that regard. It is possible, it is likely, that you're going to be wrong in this estimate. It is not going to be exact, and I really think that that is okay. Because when I think about an estimate, I think about this is a planning tool. This is just to help us understand internally about how much time is this going to take. we want to make sure, again, that we're allocating enough time for people to actually do this work. We don't want them to be rushed. We don't want them to be feeling like their hair's on fire as they're getting this work out the door. We want them to have enough time. And part of the key in getting an estimate that is more accurate is that you're continuing to update it as it moves forward. But at this stage, one of the keys in making sure that your estimate is more accurate than less accurate is that you're identifying risks. Risks are essentially anything that could cause this project to derail or ultimately fail for the client. And anything that's outside of your control, this is ultimately a risk. So some examples of that. It could be that you are integrating with another business system inside. Maybe it's a customer relationship management tool, CRM, they have to integrate with. Maybe it's their learning management system, their LMS. Maybe it's another vendor that you have to work with. They're asking two vendors to work together on a given project. These are all risks because they ultimately are outside of your control, and it's really hard to understand how much time that they're going to take in order to be able to complete. And so because of that, you want to make sure that you leave a contingency. And I mean that from two ways. First of all, that you're including contingency in the budget that you are setting forth, the quote that you're setting forth of the actual monetary amount. The second is from time. Again, it's really important that you're planning out the amount of time that this is going to take because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So leave enough time for these things that are identified as risks. As you're working on this contract, the next thing you want to do is you're going to be planning out your deliverable, essentially the schedule that you can set forth to your client saying, by such and such date, you are going to get this. And for that first deliverable, make sure it's something that's pretty easy for you to produce. And the reason is simply this. Most clients, most big companies, do not let you invoice them simply upon signing the contract. They need something in return for that, and a signature on a contract does not count for that. But what does count are things like kickoff meeting notes, initial node maps, use case drafts. All these things count as deliverables, and these are all things that you can produce within about a week's worth of time. And that's important for two reasons. First of all, it lets you start submitting invoices right away. If this is the first time that you're working with this client, you need to understand how their invoicing system is going to work. And that could be tricky because they're not going to accept something that you just spit out of QuickBooks or whatever your time tracking software is. It's also important because if you've not worked with large companies, you're probably used to net 10 or net 30. But that's probably not going to happen. We're noticing an unfortunate trend, which is that a lot of these larger companies, they're moving toward net 60 or net 90. And there's really nothing we can do about that because they get to say, they got the money, they get to say what their payment terms are going to be. And what's worse is that some of them even have a set schedule for these dates, meaning that they only pay it in August, they only pay it in October, and they have due dates for when you have to submit these invoices by. And so if you miss that due date, your net 60 may turn into a net 120. And again, you need to plan to use their invoicing system, which is why it's so important that your first deliverable is something that is easy. It lets you get practice in working with their invoicing system. It also lets you start this, hopefully not 120, maybe this net 60 timeline a lot sooner in your process. All right, so at this point, we got our project going, and it's time to start working on the work. So we're at this point in our roadmap. And the first thing, the most important thing maybe that I could tell you about this is make sure you're defining unique roles for your team members. I really believe that the best way to make a good product is to build a team of people that understand what their unique role is in building that project. The way we do this internally is that we plan everything together. These are actual whiteboarding sessions that we have as we sit down and start planning a new project. Designers might be included in this. Certainly the development team is. If there's a project manager, a lot of times they're included on this as well. The goal during this time is that we start crafting a vision for what the end product is going to be. The statement of work sort of vaguely and from a technical standpoint said like, is going to check off, A, B, C, and D. But now we're talking about more specifically. We want to give everyone a clear picture as to what this thing is going to be in the end. And this is important, again, for a few reasons. First of all, it gets everyone on the same page. It helps reduce confusion. And doing this early on, it helps make sure that we're making the most efficient use of our time. This is also important because it helps team members start to really grab hold of this vision that you're building for this product. It helps them understand, here's how I can uniquely contribute to this. And I think that unique contribution is important because that is great motivation for team members, for them to think, I'm very much important to this project. And that's really good, especially for a small team, because really everyone is important on a small team. You don't have enough people that can just spread the work around. We need everyone to be doing their job. From here, we ultimately get a very long list of to-dos, which we put inside of our ticketing system. We use Assembler, but you might use Jira or another tool for that. And as we're doing this, we actually put dates in there. They're not necessarily due dates, we actually call them roadmap dates. And the purpose for this is that we're actually planning at this date, on August 14th, these tasks should be either done or at least started. And the reason we do this, again, goes back to those risks that we identified when we started the project. The things that we didn't know how to do, we're going to start with those. There are certain tasks that we can do in our sleep, whether it's creating a storyboard, setting up view controllers, or even communicating with the server. Like, we've done these things time and time again. Those are not really risks for us anymore. The risks are integrating, again, with systems that we've never done before. Maybe it is building a new UI control that we just don't really know how to do yet. So we start with those. As we're doing all this, we're thinking about how do we keep things on track. One way is to start with the tasks that are going to be risky. Next is to avoid scope creep. Here's the main principle that I want to make sure you guys take away from this. Scope creep is not the same thing as value add. It's very much important to understand that, because there's a big temptation to do that. But it makes a really fatal assumption, which is that you and your client have to put the same value in whatever feature it is they're asking you to build. And that's wrong on two accounts. First of all, you're assuming that you understand what your client thinks is valuable, which means that you assume that you understand what their entire business model is. You might have a decent understanding of that if you have a longer working relationship with the client, but there's a good chance that your client doesn't put the same value on whatever it is they're asking you to do. They don't really know what the time or the investment is required in order to build a feature. I mean, that's why they're hiring you, is to do the development. So don't make assumptions about value. Make sure that you're discussing impact with your client at every step of the way, because they're going to come up with new ideas. Some of them are really good ideas, some of them not as good ideas that they're going to come up with. And when these things come up, discuss the impact. Discuss, maybe we could trade this feature with this other feature. They're approximately the same. But we can take this other feature that we were planning on and move it to the backlog and replace it with this new feature that you're suggesting. Another thing you can do is produce a change order. Now, you don't want to become a company of change orders, because that can be really irritating for a client if at every step of the way you're like, oh, change order. But they do have a place. And that place is simply this. At the start of your time working together, you had a contract and something was missed. And so we want to get both people on board to make sure that we're still building the product that both people want to have built. And a change order is a good way of doing that. I'll also mention that a change order has a funny way of turning a critical feature into a nice to have. So there's that as well. Now, if scope creep is coming from the outside, something that the client is perhaps imposing on you, there's another internal force you need to watch out for. Those are rabbit trails. And we have found these to be a big temptation on larger projects, because you have a lot more time, you have a lot more budget. You think, I can just work on this, I can spend much time figuring out all these new ways to do things. And there is some truth in that, but before you know it, you've run out of time. Now all of a sudden you're in crunch mode, and the due date is next week, and you have at least 4 weeks of work that you need to be able to complete in that time. The question that you're always answering as a developer is, am I headed in the right direction? And that is a really hard question to answer, especially when you're working on something that you've never built before. How do you know if you're heading in the right direction? You don't even know what it is the end product's going to look like. We have a few ways that we handle this internally. And one of them is we weigh our experiments versus our investments. Our experiments they're similar to a spike, in that they're designed to further understanding of a particular problem. And we hope that they are, well, we kind of require that they're fueled by one question. And it is often in the format of, can I do X with Y under Z conditions? There's something that you need to be able to do. You think you can do it with such and such framework or such and such approach. And you have these constraints that it needs to be able to work within. This is the question that you're looking to answer. And you want to be able to answer it within one day. Now, this implies that some of these larger questions, because there certainly are big questions that you need to answer, sometimes you need to break them up into smaller questions that can be answered within one day. And this is beneficial because at each day you're able to, in some way, measure, am I on track? And those are important things that you want to be able to do. And as you're doing that, you want to predefine, at what point do you abandon this? At what point does this experiment that you're trying very clearly not fulfill the need that you have? And at that point, it's like, we'll just part ways with this. But if you come to a point where you've satisfied all your questions, it seems like this is a valuable approach, a feasible approach, then it's time to invest in it. Invest in it. And what I mean by that is, it is time to really go all in on that. And that might be in architecture. It certainly means time that you're investing in on it. And ultimately, it may even mean getting a third-party product to work inside of this. Whatever it is, make sure that you are committed to solve the problem in this chosen approach. We learned, I think it was just yesterday, this whole idea about decision fatigue. If you're waffling between two ideas, all you're doing is burning energy and not ultimately getting further to where it is you need to be. So commit, go this way. It's probably not going to be perfect, what code ever it is, but you want to keep moving in the direction that you've chosen, and only as a last resort, abandon it and move on to something different. The mantra that you might hear if you're walking in our office is first get it working, then get it working well. And the principle there is that focus on solving the problem. Don't necessarily worry about how you're solving the problem. There's a lot of decisions and problems that you need to make. And you want to make sure that you're focusing on the one that's important. Can I solve this problem? I don't care about what your variables are named, how many classes you have, what approach you're taking. Can you get it to work? Because at that point, you have this hindsight that now you're able to deal with. You've come this whole process, and now you're able to look back and be like, okay, now I have a much clearer picture of how this problem needs to be solved. More than that, now you hopefully understand the problem. Because in my case, it has been that when I start working on a problem that I've never worked on before, very rarely do I have a clear understanding of what that problem is when I start. And so by just solving it and then looking back and evaluating, it's like, okay, now I can see what would have been the best way to solve this. And I can refactor my code into that. And so as you're working on this, it's also important to make sure that you log your time that you spent on a deliverable. Now, if we had our roles flipped, I'd be out there thinking to myself, no, I hate doing that. I think that this is a necessary evil. And I've lessened my view on this a little bit because I'm understanding more and more just how valuable understanding how much time something takes to be able to make. And so I think it's really important that you remove the burdens of time reporting. A great way to do that is to make sure that no one feels compelled to lie about their time, especially new members of the team. A little story. When I first started at Float a number of years ago, one of the first projects that I was working on, well, first of all, let me say, Float is really good about helping new team members understand why are we tracking time. And it is simply this. We just want to know how much time something takes. That is valuable data for us is the next time we're working on a similar or somewhat relatable problem, we're able to say, we know it took this amount of time last time. It's just valuable data. That's all it is. It is no way a way to calculate performance. But being a new team member, I had this vision in my head, or this perception. It was like, this is what an expert would write code. This is what the code of an expert would write, and this is how much time it would take. And so on this first project that we're working on, I was responsible for building the content management system for a pretty cool video wall. It was for a university, and students could come in and upload pictures and text messages from their phone. It would go to a content management system where someone could curate them and make sure that everything was, A-okay before displaying it publicly. And we're sitting in these conference rooms talking about the features of the CMS, and they're asking me, Dan, how long do you think it's going to take? And I'm sitting there freaking out on the inside. I'm like, they're going to figure out I'm a fraud. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. On the outside, though, keeping my cool, thinking, 2-3 days max, no problem. But it didn't take 2 to 3 days. It took 5 days. It took 6 days. And so what I did was I worked all day, and I went home and kept working and never logged that time. I totally lied about the amount of time all of these features took. And that led to problems. First of all, it led to problems because it means I wasn't sleeping. I was doing 16 hours of work in a day, and I would only log 8 of them. And I literally did not sleep for portions of time. And that had consequences. But it also meant that they had no idea how much time this stuff was taking. So when we had a future project that was similar, we underestimated it again because they looked at the data and were like, oh, this is easy. It only takes 2 to 3 days. But there's multiple of those, and they all took at least double that. So there's that. Don't ever punish for exceeding a time estimate. Again, those are planning tools. And if you're really using it as a planning tool, it's something that you're keeping up to date. What time reporting lets you do is to start comparing these numbers and seeing, this is how much time we thought it was going to take. This is how much time it actually took. If there's a large difference, let's ask why. Maybe it's simple. Maybe we just way underestimated it. Maybe we were very optimistic that day. That's something that's good to know. Maybe the company is not providing the right tools to their employees. If you're sitting there waiting 5 minutes for everything to build, it's probably time for a new computer. Or maybe the software you're using is broken and someone needs to help you get things fixed there. Maybe the company is not providing the right tools. Or maybe it is a case where the developer, they just need a little bit more time to learn about how to use this new framework that they've never used before. Maybe something's totally changed in iOS, and we need time to watch these WWDC videos to figure out what it's all about. Finally, make sure that you find a tool that makes logging time easy. We're still working on that. So I have no more. Advice to that. Find a tool that makes this easy. I hear team members of mine laughing over there because they know what I'm talking about. The reason why this is important because it's the flip side of this. You want to make sure, again, that you're continuing to re-estimate the amount of time that's remaining on a project. The tool that we use, I mentioned already, Assembla, has, I suppose, their version of a Burndown chart. And we watch this as we go over the course of a milestone. A milestone may last for a month or 2 months. And what the yellow line shows us is that at the start of the milestone, we thought that there would be, 600-700 hours worth of development work that needs to complete. And so the yellow line says, well, if that's where you started and your due date is, in October, where the work remaining needs to be 0, here's the trend that your work needs to follow. And so if everything is going well, the blue line, which is the actual, somewhat tracks that path. But sometimes our burn down chart is actually showing us that things are burning down. They're not going the way that we thought they were going to take. These are actual screenshots from our system of projects that went well and not so well. So what do you do when this happens? Because this will happen, and this is okay. But this doesn't mean that your developer is a bad developer. This doesn't mean that they're wasting their time. And maybe it does, but it probably doesn't. So what do you do in this regard? It means that your best laid plans are just not working out the way you thought that they would. And that's just a fact of life. So when things are starting getting off track, the first thing that you need to understand is that something simply needs to change. Maybe it's the time frame. Maybe you just need another week. The reason why we keep track of that is because we want to understand, if possible, a month in advance, 2 weeks in advance if we're going to start missing, because we want to communicate to our client, hey, you know what? It looks like we need another week to work on this. Not a big deal. Maybe the scope needs to change. Maybe you bit off way more than you could chew for a given milestone. Let's just cut that back a little bit. Let's defer some of this work to the next milestone. And maybe it's people. Maybe you need more help on this project, the help of an outside contractor. Maybe you need 2 people internally focusing their time on this versus before you only had 1. Certainly there's a principle that we understand that adding more people does not necessarily reduce the amount of time. But sometimes having more people, having more maybe experts working on something, it helps. You will be able to speed up that time that you have left. Make sure that you respond quickly and wisely to this. It would be very foolish if you just watch this blue line go way past the yellow line and be like, I think we'll be fine. I'm sure that they'll be able to catch up in a week or 2. In no time, you can't invent time. Maybe your estimate was so far off that you thought something would take 4 weeks and it would take 1 week. Then you have a different problem that you need to worry about, is that your time estimate is still way wrong. Make sure you're responding quickly and wisely to this. Avoid entering survival mode. Here's a little I suppose, test for you. If someone comes by your desk and says, hey, how are you doing? How's this week looking for you? And your response is something along the lines of just looking to get through this week. You've entered what I call survival mode. And I think this is really dangerous because what it means is that you are just looking to check off this list of things that you need to do. Do not be controlled by your to-do list. This does not mean that there's not going to be busy weeks. This does not mean that there's not going to be some busy nights. Certainly, those things are going to happen. What I'm saying is that you don't ever want to be controlled by your to-do list. Your to-do list is not the authority for your time. You should be that. Your to-do list is simply a planning tool to help you plan your time out. If you're just looking at that, what the next thing to tell you what the next thing is that you're going to do, you risk working on the wrong task. Because when you created that to-do list, maybe you thought you'd have more time. If you're starting to run out of time, what things on your to-do list don't need to be done, I suppose. You don't want to risk on the wrong task. This is about being really efficient with your time. And again, as a new developer, I come into this sometimes a number of years ago thinking to myself, but I just want this to be this ideal, perfect solution. But I'll let you in on a little secret that I learned, which is that the ideal solution is often not the right solution in programming because it makes a lot of assumptions. First of all, the right solution needs to encompass a lot of things. First of all, it needs to encompass budget. And I mean a few different things by that. Yes, it needs to encompass monetary budget. But it needs to encompass time. Can you actually realistically build this feature in the amount of time that you have? It also needs to encompass energy. Programming is hard. You're going to come across things that just bang your head against a table that is going to just burn out your energy. Do you have the energy to be able to produce this ideal solution that you're thinking of? Or can you balance it out? Can you find maybe something of this less than ideal, which, by the way, ideal solution does not actually exist. It's just something you invented. Can you lessen that a little bit and find something that is going to fit within the time that you have? That is ultimately going to produce a better solution in the end because it is one that you tested more, it is one you thought about more, and not one that you panicked over. Another recommendation is to produce accurate documentation. And this is specific if you are working with a client that has an internal QA team. We work with a few of them. A lot of times it'll come up when you're working on a product that in some way is related to legal issues or compliance issues. They'll have a QA team that makes sure that your software in no way can interfere with some sort of legal or compliance issue. So we have at least one of these QA teams that we work with, and they're rock stars, seriously. I know there's no such thing as perfect software, but if there was, I would just assume that it went through this team, because they find everything. And I kid you not, they have got a team of 3 or 4 people, and they spend 10 straight days just pounding on things in the application. They find the strangest bugs. And sometimes it seems like it's to a fault. My favorite bug is this one that landed in my inbox a number of months ago, which is that the push notifications were not being received if the iPad was turned off. This is actually ticket in our system, ticket 1105, this is in our system. We got this bug, and what I wanted to do was right click and say close dumb. But this turns out this was actually a bug. They actually did find a bug, and it wasn't, at least in this case, it wasn't that the push notifications weren't being received when the device was off. It was that when the device was turned back on, the push notifications that we promised would be delivered to the device weren't. And that was a problem because some of these were for compliance issues. We're telling people about updates to the content that they're receiving or giving them notifications. Well, if you've worked with Apple's push notification system, and I don't know if this changes in iOS 9, but you're not guaranteed when the push notifications are not able to be delivered, you're not guaranteed that they're all going to go to the device. Apple has, I think they call it their quality of service or their store and forward system, which means that you're only guaranteed that the last push notification is actually going to be attempted. Sometimes they will start erasing push notifications, just keep the last one. This was important because the documentation we provided did not take this into account, and the tools that we provided also did not take this into account. So we had to make some adjustments. So make sure that you're providing accurate documentation, because otherwise you're just going to draw out this QA process as they have ridiculous expectations that you knew that they would never work, but you told them that they would. So make sure that your documentation is accurate. And one way to do this is to provide a wiki for developers to keep things up to date. I still kind of fight with this notion of sometimes it feels like writing good documentation feels like this waterfall approach, because you're going to document all this and then you're going to write to specifications. And while I don't necessarily claim to follow everything, purely agile, I don't think that that's necessarily true, because agile has not ever been about just making things up as you go along. It has always been about a plan that you can keep updating and keep making sure that it is fulfilling the need that you set out to. And you can do that with documentation. And again, one of the ways that we've done that is by keeping it in a wiki, that developers can keep it up to date, because the questions that they had as they're developing are the same questions that the QA department is going to have as they're testing. All right, so at this point, we actually have something that we can deliver to our client. So let's talk about delivering on one of the milestones of the work. And we come back to this, which is make sure that you do not deliver late, ever. It is your client's prerogative to be late. They will probably be late in giving you feedback at some point in time, but you should never be late to delivering to your client. But the good news is that delivering on time is largely about meeting your client's expectations. Again, another reason why we're tracking how much time is left on something is that if we really do get off and all we need is another week, we want to give the client enough time to tell their stakeholders if things have changed. I would not want to be in a situation where we told the client they're going to deliver something, I don't know, on Wednesday, and then they have their boss coming to them and be like, hey, where is this thing that was going to be delivered today? And then be like, I don't know. The client should never have to wonder when the next build is coming. Delivering something on time, I think that is the perfect picture of expertise. Because consider that in order to do that, you had to diagnose, prescribe a solution, and implement the solution all within the time frame that you said you were going to. Like that's what experts do. And so if you're able to do that, even if it means that something needs to shift, you are demonstrating your expertise to this client. And I think it is okay for dates and scope to shift, just not the day of, not the week before. When you know that something is off, talk to your client about it. You are both in the same goal here, which is that you want to build a great product. The other thing we learned is, if at all possible, don't allow revision cycles. This just burns out the energy of the team as you're going back and forth with the client. They have all these new and great ideas that they want to implement. And you try to avoid those as much as possible. And one way to do that is to require the client to sign off on a deliverable. So if you deliver them something, say, we need feedback by next week, and just sign off on it and then give us the list of things that you want to be different about this. So we call that signing off with changes. And when you do this, give the client a tight, because you don't want them just this idea percolating in their head over and over again as they just think of all these new and great things they should add. Give them a tight deadline, but give them a realistic one, because it might need to go through a QA team. They might want to show it off to their boss or to other members of their team to get some new feedback. So tight but realistic approval windows. And after a couple cycles of this, not necessarily revision cycles, but cycles of delivering on your milestones, you're at a point now where you're wrapping things up. And so let's talk about finishing the work. Make sure that you help release the product to whoever the client's customers is. It may be employees of their company. It may actually be customers of the company. And I say this because if the social outcry, every time Facebook makes the slightest change in the timeline is any indication, people are very much adverse to change. And in many ways, this is more true in the enterprise. When technical change, people equate this to IT coming in, taking away something that was working just fine, and giving them something that is totally broken. People are very much adverse to change. And so if that's the case, this new app that you've created, no matter how brilliant it is already starting off on the wrong foot. People open it up and be like the old way better. I don't understand why things have to change. Everything was fine before. I was doing my job and things are going great. So some things that we've done in order to help prepare for this. And the reason why I think this is important is that you as app developers, your job is not just to, you want to make sure that your app is successful. And so part of doing that is making sure that it gets into the hands of people and that they like to use it. So one of the ways is making the app onboarding delightful. This might be through the design that you create. In many ways, it's just give the people a way, give the customer a way to understand what's new, why it's different, why is this better, how is this going to improve their life. This might mean producing some fun, short marketing videos a week or two before you're actually going to release. It is a way to give people a chance to get excited about it, to see what's coming, to help prepare themselves and just start thinking about, yeah, you know what, maybe this app really is going to be better than this 30-page binder that I have to go through every time. Maybe you can convince your client to make the change optional. So many of the changes that happen in enterprise are required, and that their employees have to abide by, regardless of whether or not they like it or not. One of the applications we produced was a game. It was a flashcard game for Salesforce, and they previously were just using stacks of binders that had technical papers and just lots and lots of papers they were going through. And so this game, it was just multiple choice question and answer, but it had a timer and a leaderboard. We made it optional. We said, hey, you can continue with your old way, but if you're interested, here's a new tool for you to use to help learn about the product. And if you end up in the top 3 in the leaderboard, we're going to give you an Apple TV. People loved it. And Apple TVs are not expensive. They're just $99. But people loved, especially the salespeople, as many of them have this innate competitive attitude. They were really excited about trying out something new. So that was really good. Another thing is make sure you let people provide feedback about your application. You made a lot of assumptions at this point of what it is they're going to like. Let them actually tell you if you've done a good job. And in the same vein, make sure you have analytics involved because you want to measure what are people's behavior in the application. Are there things that you need to change for the next version? And so both the client feedback, or the customer feedback, and this analytics that you're pulling, these are helping you to plan out version 1.1. And that's important because in a couple weeks, you want to check in with your client. You want to check in with them, how are things doing? This could be humbling because things might have flopped. In which case, it's just time to just pull up a chair and sit down and learn what could you have done differently. And it might not even be your fault. The client might have required these last-minute changes that you knew were a bad idea. But now the next time you encounter that with a different client requiring you to make the same type of changes, you can say, hang on, I have this example from just a couple years ago that says that this is not going to go well. So there's always something to learn from that. But the flip side is maybe it was a total success. People are loving it. It's hot. And what's great is that you already have this list of features that you've planned for version 1.1 that you can talk to your client and say, hey, you know what? Let's keep the momentum going on this. Here are things that we know that people want to see in this. Let's start developing them right away. I can't think of a better way to end an engagement with a client than by things going well, and then already having concrete steps for your next engagement with them. So let's go ahead and wrap up our time together here. Here's the question I threw out at the beginning. How do we support people to build great software, which in turn provides opportunities to build up great people? Now, I lied a little bit at the beginning. I said this wasn't going to be a talk about money. I said it was about people and about software. But in many ways, you could argue that this is about the very essence of money. If I may be so bold, money is simply this. Money is stored time, energy, and talent. Understanding that, how are you investing the time, energy, and talent of yourself or your team? Are you wasting time on things that ultimately are going to go nowhere? Are you wasting energy in revision cycles or building 15-page papers that no one's going to read? Are your employees, is your team, are they having a chance to build something that they want to build, to have the impact that they want to have? I hope that some of our experiences have had a chance to inspire you and encourage you. Now I'm exhorting you to think about what is the workflow that you have in place? What are the things that you are investing in? These just barely 15 things that we've learned over the last couple of years just barely scrapes the surface of the things that we have learned. But we've had a really great time. We have a great team. We work with great clients. We get to work on some great projects. Not to say that we haven't stubbed our toe and we are still learning, but we've had a really fun time. And I really hope that this has offered you the ability to maybe think about how you're doing things as well. And that's all I got.